Welcome to the Vault Excel. Thank you for joining me. Got new information coming from Idaho pertaining to the death penalty. The state of Idaho has decided to induct the firing squad as a method of death. Do you agree or disagree? Please go to my community board to take several polls pertaining to the subject matter. As most of you know, Brian Koiberger, who's accused of murdering 4 students in Idaho, may face the death penalty. Also, Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell are facing the death penalty for the murders of Tylee and JJ and Tammy, Chad's wife. So imagine what they are thinking now with this new information, because each person I've mentioned are facing murder, have been charged with murder. Koiberger is charged with murdering 4 kids, and Chad and Lori are facing murder for 2 children and an adult. And I do believe it was orchestrated by Lori and her brother to kill her husband, Charles. These are the questions on my community board. Please take the polls while listening to this content pertaining to the death penalty in Idaho. Number 1, is Koiberger now scared of new Idaho law to execute death by firing squad, or does he not care? 71% of you said does not care. 29% of you said scared, 7 votes. Should states go back to hangings and electric chairs death penalty execution? 55% of you said no. 45% of you said yes, 11 votes. Should there be a death penalty? 77% of you said yes. 23% of you said no, 13 votes. Idaho approves firing squad as a death penalty execution. Is this humane? 70% of you said yes. 30% of you said no, 10 votes. Let's hear what the state of Idaho has to say. Idaho okays veto-proof bill to allow execution by firing squad. This was uploaded 12 hours ago. 4 News Now is the source. Thank you all so much for your time. 1 second.
Bring back execution by firing squad. Firing squads will only be used if the state cannot obtain the drugs needed for lethal injections, but one death row inmate has already had his scheduled execution postponed multiple times because of drug scarcity. Idaho previously had a firing squad option on the books, but has never used it. Idaho lawmakers passed a bill that would bring back execution by firing squad. Firing squads will only be used if the state cannot obtain the drugs needed for lethal injections, but one death row inmate has already had his scheduled execution postponed multiple times because of drug scarcity. Idaho previously had a firing squad option on the books, but has never used it. It was removed from state law in 2009. The bill now heads to Governor Little's desk.
All right, everybody, news 4. So if there are no drugs to use for execution, then the firing squad will be the next method. Do you agree or disagree? Do you agree of the firing squad in general to be a death penalty situation? Should they bring back other methods, the United States government? Should the United States bring back other methods of the death penalty? Because at one time, back in the older days, you would be hanging the town square as a method of death. Then as years went on, we had the electric chair. Do you agree with the electric chair as a method of death? Do you agree with this firing squad? Period. Whether it's the main method or only to substitute not having the drugs to implement death. We have also heard that it is expensive to execute a person, which in my mind, I'm trying to understand why. Because my thing is, you're only going to find the way, number one. Number two, find the person to pull the trigger, the chair, or the needle. Why is it expensive? I guess I need to do my research to understand why it is expensive. As most of you know, Brian C. Kohlberger, accused of killing 4 students in a house in Moscow, Idaho, may possibly face the death penalty for the said charges of murder. How does he feel about this new bill to go to the governor's desk? As you heard in his commentary, it was on the table before in the state of Idaho, the firing squad. And there are other states that do have this method. I will bring you that said commentary. I want to thank you all so much for joining me. God bless all of you. Have a wonderful week. I will post a movie of the week or weekend on the community board. I think the movie of this week will be my choice of Stepmother 2. If you've seen number 1, you'd like to see part 2. Thank you all so much for your time. Let's hear what they have to say at this KTVB 7, what they have to say about this.
Making final moves today, and a final note for you that is making headlines around the country and the world today. That is because Idaho lawmakers have sent a bill to the governor's desk that would add the firing squad as a secondary method of execution in the state of Idaho. Long story short for you, Idaho has had a very difficult time getting the drugs needed to do a lethal injection, and Idaho isn't alone in that. Pharmaceutical companies no longer want their products used for the death penalty. So Idaho has a death row inmate that they tried to put to death, but continue to have issues getting the chemicals. So in comes House Bill 186, and it is one signature away from being law in the state of Idaho. Governor Brad Little can sign it as soon as this week, and the idea, it already passed the House. So lawmakers knew today that this was the final debate on the topic, adding the firing squad. Supporters say this is about carrying out law and order. Critics of the idea question the consequences.
I've seen the aftermath of shootings, and it's psychologically damaging to anybody who witnesses it, anybody who has a hand in it, anybody who plays a role in the aftermath and the cleanup and all of the logistics involved. It's, in a word, brutal. And the use of the firing squad, in my opinion, is beneath the dignity of the state of Idaho.
There are some who have argued, let's just find another method. Let's come up with something. There are other drugs that we can use. We are constrained and restrained, whether we like it or not, by limited methods of carrying out this policy. And this is one that we know will withstand all of the legal machinations that will continue to be thrown at the policy rather than the method.
So final tally in the Idaho Senate for you this afternoon, 24-11, the bill passed.
I was making so much.
Sorry about that. 24-11. KTVB News is the source number 2 for this topic. Inhumane, is it? Is it inhumane? You hear this gentleman speaking of how brutal shootings are? The cleanup, the psychological effect. Will this be a psychological effect of the people who have to go in and clean up after shooting someone to death? How many shots will it take? What type of gun will they use to shoot him or her, the inmate, to death? It's a lot to dissect. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Vault XL. Will the person be standing upright or lying down? Will they face the crowd or face a wall? Drugs used by pharmaceutical companies. Some do not want their drugs used for the death penalty. They said they are used to save lives, not to kill people. Do you agree or disagree? We do know that certain drugs can put you down. We've learned this from many people dying in hospitals because they got too much of a certain drug and he or she later died in the hospital. So, frankly, I think many drugs can be used for death penalty. For the death penalty. I repeat that. Many drugs were used to kill patients in hospitals by nurses deliberately and by mistake, if you get my point. So really, there shouldn't even be an issue of a drug to find to kill a person when we have had people die in hospitals from alleged drugs that were administered that they were supposed to have and also not supposed to have. Firing squad. Is it an inhumane method of death? But then when you have the forethought of how the person died, victims, such as the 4 students in Idaho, one could say, is it really a big deal for you to be shot to death multiple times, considering you stabbed these kids several times, or however a person chose to kill his or her victims? So when you count a person being stabbed 7, 8 times, 30-something times, is it really a comparison? You're entitled to your interpretation. The perpetrator shot somebody 5, 6 times. Should he also die the same way? Some may think you should die the way that you gave it to your victims. You stabbed your victim 7 times. Well, let me stab you 7 times. You shot him 7 times. We shoot you 7 times. An eye for an eye. The scripture says, thou shalt not kill. The law of the land says you are not to kill another person unless it is self-defense. But the Bible doesn't clarify murder. Murder is murder. Thank you for joining me. The next commentary is pertaining to this new law to be passed, Brian Kohlberger, and also we'll talk about Chad and Lori because they are facing the death penalty in the same state. Thank you for your time. News Nation is my third source. Idaho legislature approves firing squad executions. This is Banfield and Mr. Enton. Please check my community page via the YouTube queue for the said upload. Good morning, everybody in the chat. Thank you for joining me this early morning live. The Queen had to get it in.
We don't know exactly what's going to be in the documents, Ashley. We assume that it'll be search warrants like the last time there was a document dump. We got an indication that the documents might be coming on Friday. That didn't happen, so it's possible they could come tonight. Basically, the judge, we have learned, is signing off on new redactions, that these new documents will come out. But the way the process works, they have to go through the Supreme Court of Idaho's website, and then they get posted there. So it really could come at any moment.
Okay, Brian, the other question I wanted to ask you is about this new legislation. This is like, it's earth-shattering, it's jaw-dropping to think. If Brian Kohlberger is watching the news or getting any news headlines, maybe even a newspaper, who knows, the headline in Idaho is going to be that the legislature passed the possibility of a firing squad. But take me through the nuances of it and how it could actually come to pass. If Brian Kohlberger is convicted, it's a death penalty case. If they seek the death penalty and if sentencing goes forward, the jury has to agree, judge has to agree. How could that actually happen? What has to happen for firing squad to kick in?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people didn't think this would happen. When I was filling in for you one night, we interviewed a lawyer from Idaho who said, I don't think it'll ever get that far. Well, guess what? It's now gotten that far. It's made it to the legislature. All that has to happen now is the governor has to sign off. And the issue here is they've got lethal injection right now in Idaho, but there has been a shortage of the medications that are used for the lethal injection. Such a shortage that there's been one case where a man was on death row and they've had to delay the execution because they haven't had the medicine. That is why this new bill came up. That is why it has now been passed. If there is a medication shortage and they don't have the medicine they need for the lethal injection, if this gets signed off by the governor, then they can use the firing squad. So, if it makes it all the way through, and if Brian Kohlberger is sentenced to death, again, a big if, we're just early on in the process. Basically, there would have to be a shortage of that special medicine that they use in the lethal injection, and then the firing squad would come into play.
It's remarkable because that has been one of the reasons so many lethal injections have been put off, executions have been put off, is because of the availability of the drugs. And so now this is a second backup. Looks like it would be instantaneous and there would not be that delay in time. But it's a big question. I think we're going to have to do a lot more conversation about it because it does require a number of people to actually be part of it. Typically, most of them have blanks. One of them doesn't, but nobody knows which one has the blanks. But there's a lot to it. So, Brian Enton, thank you. Appreciate the reporting on this. Thank you for watching.
Banfield and Mr. Enton. As you hear, blanks, no blanks. Nobody knows who has the blank. Nobody knows who has the bullets in the gun, such as even with the needle, who pulls the lever for the execution. When they used to have execution by electric chair, you didn't know who pulled the lever. It was a secret. But at some point, if you're pulling the gun, I think you're going to know that your gun had a round in it. But naturally, you're not supposed to go out and tell anybody. You were part of the firing squad. You're the one that pulled the lever for the execution of the electric chair, and you were the one that administered the lethal drug in the needle to the arm of the perpetrator inmate. Do you agree with the death penalty? Number one. Number two, do you believe in the firing squad as a method for death? Do you believe it should be an exchange for not having the drugs in the state of Idaho and a few other states? I believe it's also on the books in Oklahoma and South Carolina. I'm going to bring you that said information. How does Kohlberger feel about this new information in the great state of Idaho, since he is possibly facing the death for quadruple homicide of 4 students? Also, Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow Daybell are facing the death penalty for murder 3 times in the same state. Imagine that. Please go to my community board to take the said polls pertaining to this topic. Thank you very much. I'm going to read you a little bit of information about what a federal execution is and the death penalty. If you'd like to donate to this great network, $ began to 129 Cash App. All stickers and chats are welcome during this live stream. Thank you so very much. Wikipedia.org is my next source pertaining to this subject matter. Capital punishment by the United States federal government. Capital punishment is a legal penalty under the criminal justice system of the United States federal government. It can be imposed for treason, espionage, murder, large-scale drug trafficking, or attempted murder of a witness, juror, or court officer in certain cases. The federal government imposes and carries out a small minority of the death sentences in the U.S., with the vast majority being applied by state governments. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, manages the housing and execution of federal death row prisoners. In practice, the federal government rarely carries out executions. As a result of the Supreme Court opinion in Furman versus Georgia in 1972, the federal death penalty was suspended from law until its reinstatement by Congress in 1988. No federal executions occurred between 1972 and 2001. From 2001 to 2003, 3 people were executed by the federal government. No further federal executions occurred from March 18, 2003 up to July 14, 2020, when they resumed under President Donald Trump, during which 13 death row inmates were executed in the last 6 months of his presidency. Since January 16, 2021, no further executions have been performed. On July 1st, 2021, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland placed a moratorium on all federal executions pending review of policy and procedures. There are 44 offenders remaining on federal death row. And I brought you that information because it was mentioned in the article I'm going to bring you to give you the difference of what a federal death penalty is. 44 on the books. Let's talk about what happens when the needle is used via a death penalty drug. Hypoxia has been mentioned when you Google the drugs used that are administered to kill a person by needle for the death penalty. What is cerebral hypoxia? Cerebral hypoxia is a neurological condition that happens when the brain doesn't get enough oxygen, even though there is good blood flow. It is a medical emergency that can happen from many events where oxygen to the brain may be cut off, such as from drowning, choking, suffocation, cardiac arrest, or head injury. Cerebral hypoxia can kill brain cells and lead to brain damage and death. Symptoms of mild cerebral hypoxia are having a hard time paying attention, poor judgment and decision-making, memory loss, having a hard time controlling movement, a change in skin color and to the lips. When the brain goes longer than 5 minutes with low oxygen, it can cause, number 1, coma, a deep state of unconsciousness. Number 2, seizures, uncontrolled, unwanted movements, sensations, or behaviors. Number 3, brain death, when there is no measurable activity in the brain. Treatment involves restoring the flow of oxygen to the brain and depends on the cause of oxygen loss, but basic life support services must be used, such as mechanical ventilation, blood producers to medications to support blood pressure and heart rate, and medication to suppress seizures. Most people who have a meaningful recovery have been only unconscious briefly. The longer someone is unconscious, the higher the chances of brain or brain death and the lower chances of meaningful recovery. Long-term effects can include vision problems, swallowing and speech difficulties, impaired thinking and judgment, personality changes, memory loss. During recovery, psychological and neurological abnormalities such as amnesia, hallucinations, memory loss, and muscle spasms and twitches may appear and then resolve. The reason why I brought you this information is because the word hypoxia is used with the drug administered for death. And now we have a new means, the firing squad. So now you don't have to worry about suffering while lying on the table, such as suffocating, losing oxygen to the brain. But then one would say, who cares? Because you didn't care about your victims. So which is better? The needle to the arm where you suffocate to death, or the firing squad? Take your pick. Gemini Moon says, give them to the victim's family and let them do what they will with them. Interesting. So should we have a more eye for an eye death penalty? You get what you gave your victim. You shot him, we shoot you. Or somebody shoots you. Hanged in the town square to be humiliated and hung to death and have people watch you die. Old way of killing people. We know many African Americans were punished by hanging, public hangings. The electric chair was one method of death. I hear it's a very painful death. You're basically being smoked to death, cooked to death by a chair. And electrocution. Basically burned to death. Interesting. Firing squad. One has the blank, one does not. So how many people are we speaking of that will shoot you and put you down? 2, 3, 4. Standing up, facing the crowd, or facing a wall, facing sideways. Should they be able to look at the people in the gallery? And as you heard in this commentary, this may have a psychological effect on the people who have to do the cleanup. Well, we do know that people clean up death every day, do they not? Detectives go into crime scenes. The ambulance workers go to the crime scene. A coroner goes to a crime scene. And our forensic staff goes to the crime scene. And then we have the people who go and clean up the house, home, business after the fact. So many people see death. Does it affect each and every one? Possibly. Maybe to some it does not. Casualty of war. occupational hazard. Guess it depends on your temperament. But I would assume you'd have to have some type of experience dealing with death to where it would not bother you to clean up a dead person and the after effects. And naturally would be kept secret, all those involved in the firing squad and the person that cleans up the scene afterwards, such as with an electrocution, lethal injection, so on and so forth. Please go to my community board to take the said polls pertaining to this firing squad method. If you're in the chat, listening, commenting, put a yes or a no if you agree with the firing squad. Thank you so very much for your time. You're now listening to the vote. Excel. One person in the chat says, are we coddling the killers? Are we? Have we? Worrying about how they feel? Worrying if they're going to suffer during death? But isn't that the reason why you're on death row? It's because you administered pain to someone which got you to be arrested, charged, found guilty, and sentenced to death. So why should anyone feel anything for you? It's a damn good question. And sometimes we do feel something, even though we know the person is cruel. They were inhumane by killing someone, torturing someone, cutting up someone, brutally murdering someone. But sometimes that part of you that's still human still feels something hearing of a person suffocating while being administered the drug, or burning to death in a chair by being electrocuted. And now the firing squad. Because you can be shot a few times and still be alive. As you will hear, shattering of a bone and slowly dying till you take your last breath. But the flip side is, should we care? Because there was no care for your victim and your victims. And most of us won't be there when they are executed anyway to know and see what the perpetrator endured in getting the death penalty. And some of us don't want to see. Some may want to see. And some do not care. Do you agree with the death penalty in general? Number one. Number two, do you agree with the United States having the firing squad? Do you agree with bringing back the old methods of the death penalty, such as hangings, the electric chair? Take the poll, and you are welcome to comment in the chat if you agree with the death penalty, if you agree with the firing squad as a method, yes or no. And do you agree with the old ways of the electric chair and public hangings? And I do believe being hung to death is not going to feel no better than getting the needle to the arm, because you're choking to death by being hanged. And as I brought you information, hypoxia is no oxygen to the brain, and that has been mentioned in the drugs used in the lethal injection. That you also suffer suffocation before passing away. Thank you for your time. This will be a very short live. That's my topic for today. Idaho has decided to bring the firing squad to the table. It was on the table many moons ago, and now it is back as a method if indeed there are no drugs to be given to the inmate on death row. Do you agree or disagree? Hello, everybody in the chat. Thank you. Just bringing you all said information pertaining to capital punishment, and also federal executions. I have one more source and I'm going to check out of here. Thank you for your time. My last source is apnews.com. Idaho is supposed to allow firing squads to execute condemned inmates when the state can't get lethal injection drugs under a bill the legislature passed Monday with a veto-proof majority. Firing squads will be used only if the state cannot obtain the drugs needed for lethal injections, and one death row inmate has already had his scheduled execution postponed multiple times because of drug scarcity. The move by Idaho lawmakers is in line with those by other states that in recent years have scrambled to revive older methods of execution because of difficulties obtaining drugs required for long-standing lethal injection programs. Pharmaceutical companies increasingly have barred executioners from using their drugs, saying they were meant to save lives, not take them. Idaho Republican Governor Brad Little has voiced his support for the death penalty, but generally does not comment on legislation before he signs or vetoes it. Only Mississippi, Utah, Oklahoma, and South Carolina currently have laws allowing firing squads if other execution methods are unavailable. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, South Carolina's law is on hold pending the outcome of a legal challenge. AP is the source. Once again, Mississippi, Utah, Oklahoma, and South Carolina currently have laws allowing firing squads if other execution methods are unavailable. If you need verification for that said information. In South Carolina, its law is on hold pending the outcome of a legal challenge. When I get more information pertaining to South Carolina, I will bring you an update pertaining to that state. But as for now, Idaho has put the firing squad on the table as of Monday. Veto-proof majority. And I read that to you. I believe it was 24-11. 22-11 for the vote. Firing squad, yes or no? Death penalty, yes or no? Hangings, yes or no? Electric chair, yes or no? Or no death penalty at all? Please take my polls on my community board for said information pertaining to the death penalty. I will read you those questions and then I will leave you all to your wonderful day. Thank you all so much for joining me. Here are the questions on my community polls on my community channel page. Please take the polls, be counted. As most of you know, Brian C. Kohlberger is facing the death penalty possibly. Lori and Chad Daybell are facing the death penalty for their crimes of murder of her 2 children and his wife. What do they think now, knowing the firing squad can be administered if there are no drugs? How does Mr. Kohlberger feel knowing that Idaho has a majority vote to induct the firing squad if there are no lethal injection drugs? As you heard in this AP News article, some pharmaceutical companies do not want their drugs used for death. They said their drugs are used to preserve life. So how many companies are in disagreement with using drugs for death, I wonder? Very curious. First question on my community poll. Is Kohlberger now scared of the new Idaho law to execute death by firing squad, or he does not care? Scared, 25% of you said. 75% of you said he doesn't care. Should states go back to hangings and electric chair as death penalty executions? 61% of you said yes. 39% of you said no. Should there be a death penalty? 82% of you said yes. 18% of you said no. Idaho approves firing squad as a death penalty execution. Is this humane? 80% of you said yes. 20% of you said no. Those are my said questions for the poll. I want to thank you for your time. I may come back on a little later with another breaking news story Please go to my community board for said updates and breaking news. There's a story coming out of, oh Lord, it was uploaded about 2 weeks ago, out of Houston, pertaining to a very diabolical, sinister African-American female, 25 years of age, molesting 2 of her students at her school where she taught. She's no longer a teacher there. I brought you a story a week or so ago pertaining to a teacher, Asian female, who's accused of sexual assault against a 12-year-old boy at the time. He's now 13. She's no longer a teacher. Was also voted with high recommendations at her school district a year or so ago. And they had a walking predator. She's now in custody, no bail. Now we fast forward a week later, or it's probably around the same time, we have an African-American female accused of soliciting 2 girls, same sex. Asian woman soliciting a boy child, do not know his race. And now we have a black female, 25, making advances to 2 girl students. Can't get any worse. Can't make this stuff up. Sinister, diabolical. And that's another question I want to put on my poll as well. I will put it on there after I come off this live stream. Should women receive the same amount of time in prison for sexually assaulting and molesting children? Because usually men would get more time in prison. Sometimes they don't get a lot of time. But we know that women tend to get lesser sentences for child molestation and rape. Should women get the same amount of time? Yes, they should. Frankly, I don't think you should be able to walk free after molesting a child because you are not safe around a child. And a child molester is no different than a rapist, no different than a serial killer. It's the same to me. You have impulses that you cannot control. Some people do not believe that you can be cured from molesting and raping children and or adults. So you are a hindrance to our community. And even if you got 7 years for rape or child molestation, 9 times out of 10, when you are released from prison, you will assault again. And you may even take the life of the victim as not to have them testify against you and or bring charges against you. And that's usually what happens in rape cases. The rapist becomes the murderer to avoid prosecution. Please go to my community page to take the said polls pertaining to Idaho firing squad now being used as a method of death if there are no lethal injection drugs available. How does Korberger feel? And how does Lori and Chad Daybell feel? Are they scared now of being shot to death if there are no lethal injection drugs? Will the firing squad just be a regular method as a death penalty? And a 25-year-old woman has been arrested for sexually assaulting 2 girl children. Please go to my community board for the said upload. I want to thank you for your time. Please have a wonderful week. My movie suggestion for this week is Stepmother 2, now playing on Tubi. If you see something, say something. Be a part of the solution and not the problem. Mind the children. God bless all of you. Please stay safe out there. Once again, please go to my community page for said updates, breaking news, and the polls. I have put polls up there pertaining to the firing squad for the state of Idaho as a death penalty measure. Weigh in, comment below if need be. If you are coming in late on this live stream, please go back to the beginning. This is a basically 40-minute live stream, so you haven't missed very much. Everything's on replay. I thank you for your time. Feel free to comment below this video once it is uploaded. You have been listening to The Vault XL. See you guys later.